We are being told by some today that the Lord's Supper is nothing more than just a common meal as Christians fellowship one with another. This growing concept needs some biblical investigation. Therefore, today, let's take a look at this concept. Well, first, it is argued by some that the Lord's Supper was observed as part of the Passover supper. The Passover was a Jewish feast that was to be eaten in memory of the Lord passing over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the firstborn of the Egyptians in Exodus 12 and verse 27. This ordinance, though, was only for Old Testament Israel, as the males assembled in Jerusalem to keep 3 annual feasts, including the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Deuteronomy 16:16. But when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, he only took bread and fruit of the vine to set up this communion. Nothing else was said to be a part of the Lord's Supper. Notice Matthew 26, beginning in verse 26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. The Passover meal was not just a common meal. It consisted of unleavened bread, roasted lamb, bitter herbs, and the fruit of the vine, as we see in Exodus chapter 12, but it was something that was only eaten once each year. So we see that the Lord's Supper was not a misuse or an abuse of the Passover feast. But secondly, we see the Lord's Supper as one of the forms of worship or one of the acts of worship. Commentary on what early Christians did in worship, we read in Acts 2 and verse 42 that they continued steadfastly, notice this, in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. If you notice here that this phrase, breaking of bread, it's in reference to the Lord's Supper, and it's listed along with preaching, giving, and praying. It's not a common fellowship meal in this passage. It is intended to be a part of our worship assemblies. Those who think that the Lord's Supper is just a common meal have to deal with Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, which says, And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together, for what purpose? To break bread. Paul preached unto them. Friends, we're being told that this was both a common meal and a memorial. In other words, a memorial within a meal. But this is not what the Bible teaches. But also we find instruction in the New Testament that shows that making a common meal out of the Lord's Supper is something that is condemned. When Paul was writing to the church at Corinth and dealing with many of the abuses that were taking place there, one of the issues that he had to deal with was their observance of the Lord's Supper as a common meal. In fact, Paul spoke to the shame of the Corinthians who were feasting with the Lord's Supper. He asked the question, he said, What, have you not houses to eat in and to drink in? Or despise ye the church of God? 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 22. What the apostle is showing us here was that the Lord's Supper was not intended to be a feast. It was not intended to be a common meal that was there for our physical nourishment. The Apostle Paul further said, And if any man hunger, this is talking about physical hunger, if any man hunger, let him eat at home, that ye come not together unto condemnation, 1 Corinthians 11:34. Friends, if the Bible teaches that a common meal and the Lord's Supper go hand in hand, then Paul failed to understand this fact. Not only that, but we could not partake of the Lord's Supper without it being a part of a common meal, if that is what the Bible teaches. Well, if not, why not? Let's get back to and stay with basic Bible teachings concerning the Lord's Supper, and stop trying to tamper with these divine arrangements that have been set forth. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today. We hope that you will give serious attention to the things that we've discussed, and that God will bless you with a wonderful day.